Hi, this is Tom from Simon Medical. This is part 2 of the NIM. What I want to do is cover basic setup once the machine's in the room and once you have the electrodes on the patient, and how to set it up, how to adjust the settings when needed, and maybe a little bit of troubleshooting. So what I always like to do was actually wait until the patient had the electrodes placed. And as we had discussed, when the patient interface box was hooked up somewhere accessible, normally on the top of the bed up by anesthesia so you could reach it, then you would go ahead and turn on the NIM. Now for this demonstration, I didn't want to wait for the boot up, so I've already turned it on. So we'll assume the patient's already hooked up. The simulator is my patient. And I will go to, you have choices here. You have neurotology, head and neck, peripheral, and custom procedures. Peripheral is most likely in the ENT world, something you're not going to use. That was for diabetic neuropathy, and it's very infrequently used. So I would mostly worry about the first two, neurotology and head and neck. So I'm going to touch neurotology, and I'm going to set this up. Actually, I'm going to go to head and neck, and I'm going to set this up for a parotidectomy in the neck so I can show you that a 4-channel. Some surgeons will monitor 2, they're monitoring the facial nerve, some will use 2, some will use 4, depending on the preference. So the cool thing about the NIM 3.0 is it's showing us where the electrodes go. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, this is really the responsibility of the surgeon. Placement of the electrodes can affect the outcome of the case. So if you're a circulator, I would be leery of, placing the electrodes. Okay, but this does give you an idea. So if you have somebody that's, needs a refresher on where the electrodes go, it'll walk you right through it. Okay, we're already connected, so there's an electrode check, and what that does is it monitors the impedance of our connection. So we want to make sure we've got a good circuit or a good connection with those electrodes and the machine. Now, right now, we've got it's a green. So it's very simple on the new model. It just gives you a yes or no. The old ones were a number, and you had to know it was below 1. I'll show you what happens if we don't, because I want you to be aware of that. So if I remove one of the electrodes, the frontalis, we've got an X here. So we know we have very high impedance here, which means either electrode's not on or something else is wrong, or it's loose, it's not making full contact. We can touch down here for details, and we can see we don't even have a number here. So basically it's off. So you know that electrode has come off. If you've got a number here that's high and it's still red, that probably just means the electrode may have slipped out, it's just touching the skin, it may be under the surgical tape, but you need to check that electrode, okay? Fortunately, my patient is right here, and I can plug it back in, and we should see that go back to positive, so we're good. So we've gone to setup, now we'll go to monitoring, and there we go. Now we have our 4 channels. We have the 2 eye channels, abicularis oris and abicularis oculi, and we have the mentalis, and we have the frontalis. So those are typically the 4 channels they're monitor. Now, if a surgeon wants to monitor a different channel, you can customize those. It doesn't take a lot of effort. I'm not going to go through that, but just know that that's something you can do, okay? This machine, when you pick that 4-channel setup or montage, it's going to default to what we think is an appropriate setting, 0.8 milliamp stimulus and a threshold of event of 100 microvolts. Okay, so that tells us when we stimulate in the site, if that electrode picks up action potential into that, or that innervates that muscle, it's going to set off that alarm. Now, occasionally someone doesn't want it to be so sensitive, which is fine. Sometimes surgeons are like, I just want it to go off when I'm very close to the nerve. So you can increase, if at the surgeon's discretion, the event threshold. So this is like, I would describe it as a seizure threshold. It takes more to have, set off or a smoke alarm. It's just a higher, needs more smoke to set off the alarm, okay? I wouldn't address those. I would never change those unless that's desired and requested by the person, the end user, the clinician using the nerve monitor, okay? Now the cool thing with the NIM 3.0, the old models, one was a turn knob, one was touch only. This had both. So if you want to increase these, you can do it with if you'd like to go old school and turn it, you can do that. If you want to touch it, increase it, you can do it. Same with the event threshold. So it makes it very simple to do that. Volume, we can turn it up down here. I don't know if we can do it. And we actually, volume, you can only do it with the old school radio knob. I'm not going to go into reports. They're infrequently used, but just know if somebody wants to save a screenshot, you can add a flash drive to the back if they need it for reimbursement or they need it for liability or documentation. Absolutely possible to do that. You'd put it in there and you'd hit snapshot and it'll save a screenshot. When you do that, you have to add the patient's information at the beginning of the case to put that in there. So again, I would say maybe 1% of my customers over 10 years use that, but it is a possibility if you need to do it. I'm going to show you the control panel and all the settings. It's a little bit hidden here, but if you see control panel, touch that. Okay, we can. You can go back and you can check your electrodes again. The event capture should always be on. Event capture, and I'll give you an example of that right now. Touch that. It's going to save whatever events come up. Okay, if I turn off event capture, that's going to go away and it's only going to be real time. So you're not going to be able to turn and look and see what channel, what nerve we set off the alarm with. So I would never deactivate event capture, okay? Print, again, you can print. I would say it's much easier to save something to a flash drive than actually have a printer hooked up to this in the OR and try to print a screenshot. Just 10 times dealing with ink and in the OR and paper is not something that's palatable for most sites. I'm going to show you advanced settings. I'm not going to get into them, but I want you to know it in case you ever have to call. Okay, there's the event tones. The default tones is what I would leave it at. It's kind of what is ubiquitous out there, and it's, if you go from one hospital to another, they're almost always set up in the brief tone. And I'm going to show you what those tones are. But I want you to know that they're here if you ever need access to that. Now I'm going to get a probe, which we should have already had in the room. This will actually be in the sterile field. It comes in a bag with the probe disconnected. So the surgeon or the scrub tech will put the tip in the probe. They'll hand this off, and hence this is the reason you want to have access to that box, and you don't want to have to be reaching under the drapes trying to get in there. Okay, and we'll plug it right here in stim 1. This is an incremental probe. A lot of the probes don't have incrementing, which means you can control the stimulus or increase the stimulus here. So I'm not even going to hook that up because that's going to I don't think it's necessary. So we're in the case. The surgeon is getting near where they think the nerve is, and they want the probe, and they ask for the probe, and they say, I'm going to stimulate. I think I'm near the facial branch of the facial nerve that's going to set off mentalis. Okay, that is stimulus. So we're delivering the 0.8 milliamps of current, and we're getting a response that is over 100 millivolts. So that is really what a nerve response. That would mean yes, you found the nerve. Okay, you know that tissue you're touching has a nerve running through it, or you're very close to it. If we stimulated, so I like to describe it as the Tweety Bird sound. So it means you hear that noise, it's stimulated, but you did not get an EMG response above the threshold level. But it did mean the probe worked, okay? So that's really the two sounds. This is the positive response, and I always like to describe this, because I was a World War II movie fan, as being in those submarines, and they would send the sonar, and you'd hear that pinging in the submarine. So that's how I described it. But whatever works for you. That is really, really the basic operation. You can always go back. You can always go back to setup. If you're in the middle of a case and you want to check the electrodes again, you can check the electrodes if you think you're having an issue with that and all the electrodes are still good. So that is really basic operation of the NIM. Now, troubleshooting, or let me cover artifact detection first. So the NIM 3.0 is the only NIM that has what they call artifact detection. So it's kind of an AI algorithm. I wanted to give you an example of artifact detection. So you've seen our software here has marked this in orange. So it's ruling this out as artifact and not genuine EMG response, likely far-field artifact or manipulation with instrumentation. It errs on the side of it being, this is probably artifact 2, but it will err on the side of it being real response to be safe. So you're not getting necessarily false negatives, you're getting false positives. So when you see an orange waveform, it's artifact, okay? And that's something that's specific to the NIM 3.0. So I wanted to mention that. From a troubleshooting point of view, if you lose a channel, if all of a sudden you lose a channel like this, you can either go back and check the impedance. An electrode's come loose or it's come out of the box. So you need to go back and look at the box, and then you need to run the impedance check. Or if electrode's off, it's off. You need to either find it on the patient, or you're gonna need to look in the box and see if it came out, okay? The other two things that frequently happen are you're gonna get a lot of just EMG response in all the channels. That is one of two things. That's either somebody's moved a cautery box or something with electromagnetic interference into the field or near the NIM, or the patient is actually getting light in anesthesia. And that's not always a popular topic with anesthesia to bring up, because you say, yeah, are they getting light? And then they say, no, but a minute later you see them pumping up the gas a little bit because they are getting light. So the NIM is very sensitive if the patient is getting light in anesthesia. If the machine is not working at all, if it's making all the noises and you're not getting a NIM response, and this is something that should be discussed before the case, you cannot use long-term paralytics with any nerve monitoring systems. So a depolarizing long-term paralytic will essentially make nerve monitoring moot and null. So that's something to be aware of too. And obviously anesthesia normally knows that. They can use some short-term paralytic agents during intubation if they need to, but it has to be something that's out of the system before you're to where you need to monitor the nerves. One additional troubleshooting topic, and maybe one of the most important, if you forget to put the muting cable on the monopolar lead that's coming out of the electrode cautery box, you're going to get a lot of artifact. So if you're getting a lot of noise and a lot of artifact, especially when electrode cautery goes off, check to make sure this is hooked up. Take the monopolar lead, put it in here, clamp it, you can wrap it around, have it very up close to the box, and it will mute the nerve monitor when electrode cautery is being used. So that's another common thing that I've seen that I thought we should interject. So those are really the biggest troubleshooting items that I've come across in my decade doing this, but there could be others, but those are the primary ones. So that is it on really troubleshooting and basic operation of the NIM 3.0. Thank you guys very much for listening. If you're interested in NIM products, please contact Simon Medical, and thanks for listening.